Mark and Linda Dawson, along with their teenage children Emily and Jacob, were the kind of family everyone in Red River, Tennessee, admired until one October morning when all four were found dead inside their locked farmhouse, leaving behind 7 disturbing clues that turned a quiet town into the stage for one of its darkest unsolved mysteries. The town of Red River, Tennessee, was the kind of place people described as frozen in time. Nestled between rolling hills and winding rivers, it was a community where everyone knew each other's business and most liked it that way. Churches filled every Sunday, and the local diner was packed with regulars who had ordered the same breakfast for decades. Nothing about Red River suggested danger. Life was steady, predictable, and almost boring. That was exactly why so many chose to settle there. Families locked away their biggest fears in the knowledge that small towns were safe. Crime, especially violent crime, belonged in bigger cities, far away from their quiet farmland. All of that changed in October 2017, when the Dawson family was found dead inside their farmhouse at the edge of town. The Dawsons were as ordinary as they came. Mark, the father, was a third-generation farmer who sold produce at the weekend market. His wife, Linda, worked part-time at the school library and was known for baking pies for every church fundraiser. Their 2 teenage children, Emily and Jacob, were involved in sports and choir, and no one could ever recall them causing trouble. Too many. They represented what Red River liked to believe about itself: hard-working, God-fearing, tight-knit. That image shattered overnight when a neighbor called the sheriff's office after noticing the farmhouse had been unusually quiet for 2 days. The curtains were drawn, the truck hadn't moved, and the mailbox overflowed with letters. When deputies entered the home, they expected to find an ill family or maybe an accident with a carbon monoxide leak. What they found instead was a scene that defied explanation. All 4 members of the Dawson family were dead. The sheriff would later call it the most unsettling crime scene he had ever walked into. Word spread through Red River faster than wildfire. People who had left their front doors unlocked for years suddenly found themselves installing extra locks and security cameras. The town's sense of security crumbled within hours. What made the discovery even more shocking was how out of place it seemed. Red River had not recorded a single homicide in over a decade. Petty thefts and the occasional bar fight were the worst law enforcement usually dealt with. That kind of peace gave the Dawson murders an almost cinematic level of horror. It wasn't just that 4 lives had been taken, it was that such a thing could happen there at all. Residents who once trusted everyone they passed on Main Street now looked twice, wondering if the person next to them could be capable of unspeakable violence. At first, speculation ran wild. Some thought it might be a robbery gone wrong. Others whispered about family feuds or a stranger passing through town. But investigators quickly ruled out the simple explanations. Valuables were untouched, the farmhouse showed no signs of forced entry, and the crime itself bore signs of chilling control. Red River was not prepared for the truth that a calculated, deliberate act of murder had taken place in one of its most trusted families' homes. The Dawson case became more than just a tragedy. It became the defining moment of fear in a place that once believed such things only happened somewhere else. The Dawson farmhouse became the center of a puzzle that seemed to have no clear solution. From the outside, nothing looked unusual. The windows were locked from the inside, the front and back doors were secured, and the porch light still glowed faintly. It didn't appear that anyone had broken in. Investigators expected to see shattered glass or a splintered doorframe, but there was nothing. That raised one unsettling possibility. Whoever entered the house was either invited in or had a way to walk inside without forcing entry. For a family as cautious and private as the Dawsons, that fact alone was disturbing. As deputies moved from room to room, they noticed another strange detail. The family members had not been found together. Mark, the father, was in the kitchen. Linda, the mother, was discovered in the upstairs bedroom. Emily was in the hallway, and Jacob was in his own room. The separation of the victims suggested a methodical approach, as though the killer had moved through the house step by step, controlling the scene. It didn't look rushed or chaotic, nothing had been knocked over, and there were no clear signs of a struggle. The quietness of it all gave the impression of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. That realization unsettled the investigators. Crimes of passion often left behind broken furniture, torn curtains, or frantic signs of resistance. Here, the Dawson house was nearly untouched, frozen in the same tidy order the family was known for. The only thing out of place was the lifeless silence that hung over the rooms. To the sheriff, it felt less like stumbling upon a robbery or accident and more like stepping into something ritualistic, a crime that had been carefully thought through. Neighbors were interviewed immediately, and most reported nothing unusual, no loud noises, no shouting, no gunshots. A few people said they remembered seeing the farmhouse lights flicker late at night, but they thought little of it at the time. Red River was not the kind of place where people imagined the worst. That mindset had blinded them to signs that now seemed obvious. The killer had managed to enter and leave without anyone noticing, and the lack of forced entry hinted that the family either trusted the person or had been tricked into opening the door. Inside the kitchen, officers found muddy boot prints that led in from the back porch but stopped short near the center of the room. It was as if the person wearing them had vanished. They didn't continue to another doorway, nor did they loop back outside. The sudden ending of the prints baffled investigators, who began to wonder if they had been intentionally wiped away or if the boots had been removed mid-crime. The crime scene forced the people of Red River to rethink their own homes. If the Dawsons could be attacked behind locked doors, then no one was truly safe. The details pointed not to a random act of violence but to something colder, calculated, and deeply personal. Every locked window and untouched piece of furniture told a story of control, and with each discovery, the case became darker, stranger, and more terrifying. The deeper investigators looked into the Dawson home, the more unsettling details they uncovered. These were not the kinds of clues that pointed toward a clear suspect or simple motive. Instead, they seemed designed to confuse, to leave behind a trail of questions without answers. What stood out most were the small, eerie signs that something was deeply wrong, the kind of details that burrowed into the minds of detectives and refused to let go. One of the first discoveries was the trail of muddy boot prints that began on the back porch and led straight into the kitchen. At first glance, it seemed like the perfect starting point to identify the intruder, but the prints stopped halfway across the tile floor as if the person had simply disappeared. They didn't continue toward the hallway, nor did they lead back outside. It was almost as though the boots had been lifted straight off the ground. Some speculated the killer had stopped to remove them, but no boots were ever found inside the home. That single detail suggested either deliberate staging or something no one could easily explain. The second detail came in the form of the family's loyal dog. The Dawsons owned a large shepherd mix named Ranger, known throughout the neighborhood for his protective instincts. Ranger was alive and unharmed, calmly resting in his usual spot near the back door when deputies arrived. The dog hadn't barked to alert neighbors, hadn't shown signs of agitation, and hadn't tried to defend the family. For investigators, this raised a haunting possibility. The animal knew the person who entered the house. Ranger's silence spoke louder than any witness statement could. Whoever had committed the crime was not a stranger in the usual sense. Perhaps the most puzzling detail was discovered beneath Mark Dawson's body. Tucked beneath his side, pressed against the floor as if it had been deliberately placed, was an old iron key. It didn't belong to the Dawson farmhouse. The family's locks were modern, and none matched the key's worn design. No safe, shed, or outbuilding on their property had a lock it could open. The key was out of place, an object that had no business being in that home. Detectives tested it against dozens of locks in Red River and surrounding towns, but it fit none of them. The key became a symbol of the case itself, strange, unsolvable, and heavy with meaning that no one could fully uncover. Other unsettling discoveries added to the growing list of mysteries. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, bowls and cups neatly arranged, though the family had not eaten. A pot of coffee had been brewed but left untouched, its surface cooled and still. Upstairs, Emily's journal lay open on her bed as though she had been writing when she was interrupted. Each of these details painted a picture of a morning that had started normally but ended with terrifying precision. The investigators cataloged everything, but none of it explained the most pressing question: why? The Dawson family had no known enemies, no debts, and no history of conflict. Each clue uncovered only deepened the sense that the murders were not random, not impulsive, but part of something more carefully constructed. And as the evidence piled up, it became clear that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to leave behind not just death, but a lingering puzzle that seemed designed to haunt anyone who dared to look too closely. Weeks after the Dawson murders, fear had settled over Red River like a heavy fog. People no longer lingered on porches at night or left their doors unlocked. The unanswered questions surrounding the case left everyone looking over their shoulders. Rumors spread through the diner and grocery store, each one darker than the last. Some whispered that it had to be outsiders passing through, drifters who vanished before anyone noticed. Others insisted it had to be someone local, someone close enough to know the Dawsons' routines. That second idea chilled people the most because it meant the killer might still be living among them. Investigators pushed past the gossip and focused on the strange pieces of evidence found inside the farmhouse. The key, the boot prints, the untouched valuables, and the calm dog all pointed toward a crime that was personal rather than random. Then, during a routine search of the children's rooms, detectives uncovered something that shifted the direction of the entire case. Beneath Jacob Dawson's mattress was a notebook, worn around the edges, filled with thoughts and scribbles. Most of it looked like ordinary teenage writing complaints about school, notes about sports, plans for the weekend. But tucked in the back pages were unsettling entries. Over and over, Jacob had written about a figure he referred to only as the Watcher. Jacob's descriptions painted a picture of someone who appeared often around the property, standing near the fields or lingering at the edge of the woods. He wrote about feeling watched when walking home from school or feeding the animals. Some entries mentioned late-night knocks on the window that stopped before anyone else could hear them. Jacob never named the person directly, but he hinted it was someone his parents trusted, someone who had easy access to the farm. The repeated references to the Watcher were enough to give investigators a new lead. Attention soon turned to a neighbor, a man who had lived less than a mile from the Dawson property his entire life. He was well known in the community for being helpful, often offering to fix fences or haul supplies. He had spent many hours on the Dawson farm, sometimes alone when Mark was away at the market. People described him as quiet, maybe a little odd, but not threatening. Still, when detectives examined the boot prints from the kitchen, they noticed the pattern matched a rare brand of work boots that the neighbor owned. That connection was enough to draw him deeper into the investigation. The man denied everything when questioned, insisting he had no part in the crime. Yet his explanation of his whereabouts on the night of the murders was shaky at best. He claimed to be home, but no one could confirm it. Investigators began piecing together a timeline, comparing sightings of him near the farm with Jacob's journal entries. What emerged was a picture of someone who had grown too comfortable watching the Dawson family, someone whose presence was not just coincidence but a pattern. The revelation stunned Red River. A neighbor, someone seen at church services and community events, suddenly stood at the center of suspicion. The possibility that the killer was not a stranger but a familiar face made the tragedy cut even deeper. It shattered what little sense of safety the town had left, and it left residents wondering how well they really knew the people living right next door. The arrest of the neighbor sent shockwaves through Red River. For a brief moment, people felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Relief because it seemed the nightmare finally had a face. Disbelief because that face belonged to a man they had trusted, someone who had eaten at their tables and helped mend their fences. The Dawson family had welcomed him into their home on countless occasions, never suspecting the darkness investigators now suggested he carried with him. But as the case unfolded in court, the fragile sense of closure began to crumble. The prosecution leaned heavily on the boot prints, the journal entries, and the neighbors' inconsistent alibi. They painted a picture of a man who had grown obsessed with the Dawson family, lurking at the edges of their property until the obsession turned deadly. The idea was chilling, but without direct evidence, it remained just that, an idea. No DNA linked him to the crime scene, no fingerprints placed him inside the house on that night, and the murder weapon was never recovered. Every detail that seemed damning was matched by a hole the defense could exploit. The defense argued that the journal entries were nothing more than a teenager's imagination, the scribblings of a boy prone to exaggeration. They claimed the boot print evidence was circumstantial since many work boots shared similar tread patterns. The key found beneath Mark Dawson's body, perhaps the strangest detail of all, could not be connected to the neighbor in any way. When pressed about his whereabouts, the man admitted to being home alone, but insisted that was hardly proof of guilt. The courtroom became a battleground between theory and fact, suspicion and doubt. As the trial dragged on, the town grew restless. People filled the pews of the courthouse, hoping each day would bring the moment when everything finally made sense. But instead of clarity, they were met with a steady stream of contradictions. Witnesses who thought they remembered seeing the neighbor near the Dawson farm were discredited for their uncertainty. The boot prints that had once seemed so important were downplayed. When the defense demonstrated how easy it was to find similar patterns at the local hardware store, even Ranger, the family dog, became a point of debate. Was the animal calm because he knew the killer, or simply because the attack had happened too quickly for him to react? When the jury finally returned, their verdict stunned everyone. They could not reach a unanimous decision. The case ended in mistrial, leaving the accused man neither convicted nor cleared. For the Dawson family's relatives, it was agony justice dangled just out of reach. For the town of Red River, it was worse. The murders remained unsolved, their mystery preserved by unanswered questions and disturbing details that refused to fade. In the years that followed, the farmhouse was abandoned, left to rot at the edge of the fields. Few dared to go near it, and those who did spoke of a heavy silence that hung over the place. The Dawson story became a warning told in hushed tones, a reminder that evil can live behind the most familiar smile. Red River never truly recovered, and the 7 disturbing details of the case lingered like ghosts, haunting the town long after the investigation ended.